Hi everyone, I'm Chef Diane, and today I'm going to be making Chianti beef. This is a wonderful recipe that I found on one of my trips to Tuscany, and I had to find a recipe for it and reproduce it, and it's become a favorite of my family and my friends. I'm sure you're going to love it too. So we have some ingredients here that I'll walk you through, and I'm also going to show you techniques on how to cook a stew the right way. It's going to make it more flavorful, and you can use this in the future for other stews that you make. You can also make this recipe with chicken thighs, bone-in, or pork, or anything that you want. So this recipe, once you get it going, can be finished off in a crock pot, or you can even use your Instapot. But it's really important to do this on the stove to get your flavors going. So I'll show you how to do that. We're going to use a beef chuck, and the reason why is that it is more flavorful. It's a little bit fattier, although it's tougher as far as a piece of stew meat. It's going to taste great, and it's used a lot in Europe. I'm soaking the beef in about 3 to 4 cups of a Chianti wine or a Cabernet Sauvignon or a Zinfandel, anything dark and rich and red. And if you can soak your beef for about 4 to 5 hours, it's going to make it taste even better. I would say you can soak this for maybe a minimum of about an hour. Okay, we're going to start our stew with a typical carrot, celery, and onion. And you notice that I've cut them big and chunky, and why? Because by the time this cooks after a couple of hours, you don't want them to disintegrate, and they will if they're minced too fine. We also have some dry oregano, some tomato paste. I've got 2 bay leaves. I've got some chopped garlic, some flour, all-purpose flour, some kosher salt, and some black pepper. And then we're also going to put prosciutto in it. So I'm going to show you a technique on how to easily cut prosciutto. So prosciutto is in our Chianti beef, but you can also use pancetta. I like prosciutto a lot because it adds a little bit of a, salty, smoky flavor to the stew. So grab a whole section of prosciutto. We have about 4 or 5 pieces here. Okay, and I'm going to start rolling this up like a jelly roll. Because prosciutto can be a little, tricky to cut. It's kind of slippery. If you ever even chop bacon, you can see that it's not that easy. So I have my jelly roll now. I'm going to take my chef's knife, and I'm going to start cutting some slices. And you can see this is nice and compact, and you can make really quick work of doing this. But we're not going to be done yet. After we cut these jelly roll pieces, we're going to hone them down a little bit more. This is just going to add such a great flavor to your dish. Okay, so now I'm just going to take maybe 2 or 3 sections of my little prosciutto jelly rolls, and I'm going to cut them a little bit smaller. Okay, this is just so we don't have really large pieces in our stew, and so that they travel throughout the stew a little bit more, so you get the flavor of this, traveling throughout the dish. So you get the flavor of this going right through that stew. So I'm almost done. You can prep a lot of this ahead of time. All right, that didn't take long at all, so we're ready to start cooking. Okay, so we have a nice heavy-duty pan on the stove. I would say you want to use, this is called a Dutch oven, and it's squatty, it's a casserole type of a pan, but you make sure that if you ever want to put this in the oven, that there's no plastic on it. So I'm going to turn my heat up into about a medium. And we're cooking with extra virgin olive oil. This is something I see in Italy all the time. They cook with it. They don't particularly use it all the time for pizza or salad dressing. I noticed that they use it for stews and sauces and everything else. I'm coating the bottom of the pan And this is probably about 3 tablespoons of olive oil in here. So I'm going to wait until my oil gets a little bit hot. I've got the burner. I'm going to crank that up to about a medium high right now because I just want to get this oil hot. And then we're going to add our onions, our celery, and our carrots with a little bit of kosher salt. So usually when you know your oil is ready is when you see a little bit of a rippling in it, or sometimes a little bit of smoking. And I think we need just a couple of more minutes to do that. And one of the reasons why is so that when you put in your veggies, they really start crisping up a little bit on the outside and sort of seal, particularly the onions, so that they can then absorb all of the flavors later on. So I'm going to turn my heat now back down a little bit to like a medium, and I'm going to pop a piece of the onion in, and I don't hear a sizzle yet, so let's give it another minute or two. So this is what my grandmother and my mother always did at the beginning of their cooking, just to see if the oil was hot enough. It's a great test. So I see my onion sizzling in there, and I'm ready to put the rest of it in. All right, so in goes my onion. Here's 1 stalk of celery, and then we're putting our carrots in. And these are about 4 large carrots. So I'm going to stir these ingredients around just a little bit to coat them in the olive oil. And then the next thing I'm going to do, and I do it with all my cooking, and you'll notice that with all my videos, my cooking videos, is that I add some kosher salt or sea salt in the beginning. And kosher or sea salt does not have iodine in it, so it's a lot less bitter. It's very pure and just gives your food a way better taste. So I'm going to stir that just a touch until the salt kind of blends in. And I'm going to stir on occasion, and when my onions are soft and translucent and they're not white anymore, that's when I know I'm ready to go. I don't have to have my carrot totally cooked. It's going to cook as my stew is cooking. So one thing that I always tell my students when I teach cooking, and also anyone else, is that it's kind of not the best thing to be constantly stirring unless you're making a bechamel sauce or a risotto, because your food is always going to be like jumping in the air, and you won't give it a chance to cook if you keep stirring around. So I give my food a little bit of break here and there. I don't want to burn it, of course, but I do want to let it sit and really enjoy that heat. I'm giving my vegetables a stir, and I'm starting to see that my onions are losing a little bit of that white color. So everything is looking really great. I'm going to give this a big swirl, and I can see those onions are starting to sing. So this is a really good time to add my prosciutto, and I'm also going to put my garlic in here now. I always wait to put my garlic into any kind of a saute like this because I don't want it to burn. And if you put it in too early, it will definitely burn. So wait a little bit until your onions have started to cook, no matter what you're making. So this is also a really good time to add my oregano, and one of the reasons why is because this will start blooming with the oil and all of the great flavors. If you were to just throw this in later, it wouldn't have the same effect. So get your dry spice in earlier. It makes a real difference. So that was about a tablespoon of oregano. I also have 2 bay leaves, and bay leaves are just great in any kind of a stew. So I've stirred my vegetables around because I wanted to get all of that dry oregano and the bay leaves going and mixing in with the oil, the olive oil. So I'm just going to let this sit for maybe 3 or 4 more minutes. Then we're going to take it out of the pan and we're going to start browning our beef. So I'm looking at my vegetables here, my prosciutto and everything, and they're really ready to go. So I am going to remove them from the pan. I'm shutting off my heat and putting them in a nice bowl off to the side, and then I'm going to saute my beef right in the same pan. You can see that the onion has lost that white color, that white cast, and this is really going to make your stew taste great. If I hadn't done that and I had just let them stay kind of white and crunchy, it would not taste the same. These are the techniques that are really important for you to learn. So doing that, I caramelized my onions, which released the sugars in the onion, and that's what makes this taste so great. I'm going to add a little bit more olive oil, but I don't want much because I want my beef to brown. So just a little tiny bit. Now you could take all of this beef out and pat it dry with paper towels, but this recipe is very forgiving, so I'm just going to grab all of the beef stew and pop it in here. I'm hearing a sizzle, which is great. Just shake off your wine. You just don't want to have this too wet. We're just going to lightly brown it. I'm getting my burner back up to about a medium to medium high. Just while I do this, don't forget that this is going to cook for at least a couple of hours, if not 2.5 hours, before this all tenderizes. So you don't have to worry about getting your beef totally browned or cooked off totally. It's going to do it later. The beef is going to be cooked off later. And don't throw away your wine. That is going to be your sauce. If you want to do this in batches, you can, so you don't crowd the pan, you can. But I am going to just get gutsy. I'm going to take my chances, and I'm putting all of my beef in here. So I'm turning up my heat now, because I want this to brown, and I'm just going to leave it alone. Okay, so the beef has been cooking for maybe about 5 to 8 minutes, and I think it's ready to turn right now. So I'm just going to grab my spoon. I can actually use the spoon that I did my vegetables in, and I'm just going to toss it around, and I'm seeing a little bit of a brown in the bottom. There is some, residual wine in the pan, and actually, that's going to be part of your stew. You don't really need to burn that off or anything. So we're just spinning this around, and we're going to give this about another 5 or 8 minutes. And then everything will get put together. The vegetables will go in, the wine. We're going to actually flour up our beef, which I'll show you how to do. I didn't put flour coating on my beef in the beginning, which you see in a lot of recipes. And one of the reasons why is because I find sometimes the flour will burn. And it will absorb a lot of your oil or your butter. So I like to add my flour a little bit later. If you don't want to use flour in this recipe to thicken up your stew, if there's a gluten issue, you can definitely use a gluten-free flour, or you could use cornstarch mixed with water. That's a very common way to thicken up stews. So it looks like it's time to pull this whole thing together. So I'm going to grab my flour, and I'm going to, this is about maybe 4 tablespoons of flour. This is about 1.5 pounds of beef. So when you get my recipe, you'll see it's a recipe for 3 pounds of beef with more flour. So I play it by ear. This is about half as much as the recipe that you'll find on my YouTube channel. So just sprinkle it all on, just coat it like it's a little snowstorm, okay? And believe it or not, although this looks like it's not going to work. It's going to turn into dumplings or something. It does not. So I'm grabbing my spoon and I'm going to kind of coat all of those beef pieces with this flour. And by the time I put in my vegetables and my wine, and I'm also going to put in tomato paste, this is going to smooth out and really be beautiful. This looks kind of muddy and, you know, gloopy. It doesn't look very appealing. You might get nervous about this point in time when you're making this, but it will all work out. You will see how smooth it's going to be. So now I'm going to add back in our sauteed vegetables and get every bit, and make sure you get any of the olive oil that was in there, because that's going to make it taste really great. So I'm going to just toss this all together. Okay, and I'm going to add my wine in now. I do not need to add any kind of broth because the wine is really going to be the sauce here. So here it goes, and it seems like it's a lot, but you really do want to have, a lot of sauce for this, so you can serve this with pappardelle or polenta or really good garlic mashed potatoes. So let me mix all of this, and make sure you scrape the bottom too, because when you do sautés like this and there's flour or there's meat, you get a little bit of that little sticky bottom, and that's the foundation of this beautiful stew and most stews, so you want to scrape that up. Okay, and we're keeping those bay leaves in there for the whole cooking time. And now comes the tomato paste. So I love buying tomato paste in tubes, because you can pop this back in your refrigerator and you can use it again and again. Sometimes when you open up a can, you know, you can put the rest in the freezer, but these are the best bets to go with. So this calls for a few tablespoons, and I just sort of have an eyeball of it, but when you're making this recipe at home, you can measure out your tomato paste. And the tomato is really important in this. It really brings it to a certain level that you really want with the flavor of this. So let me stir that in. And although this looks a little bit soupy right now, when this cooks for a really long time and thickens up, you'll be really surprised at how it looks. So the texture and the color will really change on this. You'll take out the bay leaves at the end, and basically you're done. This can now go into a crock pot if you want, or it can go into your Instapot, and just follow directions on how to finish off a stew, and you're all set. So here's my Chianti beef stew. It cooked for about 2.5 hours. It tastes great. You want to salt and pepper it at the end before you serve it, because that always really pops the flavor. You can serve it with a beautiful piece of ciabatta bread. This would be great on pappardelle noodles. You could roast potatoes off to the side, have this on top of polenta. So I hope you get to make this. It's one of my favorite dishes, as I mentioned, and not that difficult to do, and you'll have a brand new recipe in your repertoire that you can make again and again. Thanks a lot, and join me next time on My Italian Kitchen.